How's it going, everybody? Back here once again, Jared Johnson, the Jared J, with my guest, Talmadge Roger Vernado the third. Welcome back, Talmadge.
Thank you, sir.
And welcome back, all of you that have chosen to join us today. We're going to be talking about a couple of other movies today. Now, Talmadge and I, neither one are huge fans of the horror film genre. And that's why I chose to select this topic for today, because over the years and the myriad of, y'all don't even know how many hours of conversations we've had, it occurred to me a couple weeks ago, I don't think we've ever really talked about horror films that much, and that's largely because neither one of us are huge fans of them. I'll touch on my reasons for that, and then you can chime in, then we'll jump into our choices for today. But we're going to be talking about what is our favorite horror films. Biggest reason I'm not a huge fan of the horror genre is I really like stuff that is realistic, and I have to be invested in something to really care about watching it. So when something's about some imaginary monster or some completely fake farcical force or some killer that gets killed at the end of every movie and comes back in the sequel with no explanation, all that does is remind me
of why you don't like them?
Yeah, it reminds me of why I don't like it. It reminds me of what I'm watching is fake. And I see stuff like that, and I think to myself, that's that foolishness and that pure nonsense. And you know how I feel about nonsense, Talmadge.
You cannot stand nonsense.
No, got no patience for it, and I'll say that's that foolishness and that nonsense. So if I see a horror movie that's plausible, possible, then I can become interested. So that's why I'm not a fan of most horror films. And are those similar reasons for you, or?
Yeah, when you brought that up, that's actually the exact reason why. I'm not going to say I don't like horror films, but I would say that they have to be based in some reality. And yes, it's a movie, so it's going to be somewhat supernatural, somewhat over the top, but realistic situations where people are encountered by something they don't expect. Also, I'm not a big fan of what horror films have become, which are cliches to me. You can tell by the music score that's being played. You can tell by the timing and the pacing what's going to happen next.
The same gimmicks you saw in every other horror
film. You're not going to scare me if I know it's coming.
Yeah.
For example, if you look at horror films from the 50s, 60s, the Hitchcocks, the people like that.
Yeah.
Those I'm a fan of because they're well made, they're paced properly, and they're put in realistic settings, as you mentioned, so they are believable, but something extraordinary happened.
Right. Okay, so we've never discussed this, but we have very similar reasons for why we're not huge fans of it, but I thought that would be an interesting topic for today's episode. So Talmadge, I'll have you kick us off. Tell us what your favorite horror film is and why.
All right. Mine may not be as well known, although I'm sure some of you have heard of it before. It was made in the early 80s, 1982 to be exact, starring Barbara Hershey. The Entity is one of my favorite horror. In fact, my favorite horror movie, more on point. The movie itself, and you got to keep in mind, make adjustments for time. The budget was $13 million.
Okay.
So for that time,
but in 1982,
yeah, not that bad. It only made $9 million though, so it didn't quite make its money back. So that tells you it wasn't the most popular movie in the world. But I liked it for some of the reasons you talked about. For those of you that don't know, it's about a single mother raising a family and in a house, and there are some graphic scenes. I will admit, she was physically attacked by something or someone that you could not see. And the movie is just a psychological thriller based on how she overcomes that. What is this entity? Is it true? Is it fake? Is it not? Is it in her mind? And there are some very violent scenes, so much so that Barbara Hershey made some comments that they got a lot of backlash back when the movie was released because of the graphic and violent scenes. But she felt like, hey, we worked hard on this movie, and the movie wouldn't be true to itself if we didn't show this, because this is the driving force behind it.
Okay.
So that gives you a little bit of insight into the movie. And going back to our original point, it is based in reality. The Entity was a book first, written in the late 70s, and it was actually based on the story of a woman in California in 1974.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's also when you watch the movie, you're thinking, okay, how much of this is really true? How much of this is adapted because of a movie?
Right.
This could be a real situation. And if it was, how horrific it would be to have something attack you that you can't see, you can't feel, you can't touch.
There's no definition
and there's no
for it.
explanation for it.
Yeah.
And it was shot graphically, which again shows the realism. It wasn't over the top or like you were talking about earlier, some of the horror films we see today where it's some character that's almost comic bookish.
Yeah.
It was presented in a way where this could really happen, and what would you do in this situation?
Okay.
And in fact, one of your favorite directors actually put this in his top list of horror films.
Really?
Martin Scorsese says it's in his top 11 horror films of all time. Now, I don't know where it ranked, but that tells me it probably is number 11, because why would you say top 11 unless you had to force that movie into it? But he thought a lot of the movie, and I thought that might resonate with you.
That actually is pretty interesting, and I will say I've heard of this movie. I have not seen it, but my curiosity is now sufficiently piqued based on what you're saying.
I would hope so, because like I said, it grabbed my attention. Not a lot of big stars in it. Like I say, Barbara Hershey, Phil Silver, some might know him. That's about it. But again, the pacing was good, just over 2 hours, which is good for me, because I'm not a big fan of the longer movies. And it told a good story, and again, it's something that actually did happen. Now, I don't know to what extent, because of course it was based on a real life event, but that alone gave it some credibility to me, and to me it was well worth the watch. And I also liked it because it's not as known. And I tend to walk down a path that most don't walk down, so for me it resonated even more.
Okay. Very cool. You got me wanting to watch it. I will say that. All right, very cool. Well, mine is one that was released almost 10 years later. A little bit more known. It is the 1991 feature film, The Silence of the Lambs. Now, to me, this one's actually a borderline horror. I would consider it more psychological thriller, but it's typically classified as horror. And I've heard some people say, well, it seems like the intent of the film was to strike fear into people.
And I wouldn't have classified it as that, so I'm glad you kind of brought this up in the conversation. I would think more psychological thriller, but I could see horror.
It's borderline, and I've heard people say that it's... I've heard a lot of people classify it as horror, and I've always been like, well, is it? So I'm kind of still of that, is it? But I'll say it's close enough that I call it my favorite horror film. Like I said, released in 1991 on a budget of $19 million, so not a huge budget either. The U.S. and Canada box office gross was $130,742,922. Worldwide gross $272,742,922. So it did pretty well at the box office. It was originally the distributor, Orion Pictures, was going to release it in the fall of 1990. But they chose to delay it to early 91 because they were wanting to promote another film that they were distributing for Academy Award consideration, a film by the name of Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves went on to win 7 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Kevin Costner and Best Picture. So that turned out to be a pretty good strategy. They wanted to put their focus into marketing that. So The Silence of the Lambs was actually released on February the 14th, 1991. Perfect Valentine's Day movie, obviously. It was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Sound and Best Film Editing, and then it won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, written by Ted Talley, adapted from the novel by Thomas Harris. Best Actress in a Leading Role, Jodie Foster. Best Actor in a Lead Role, Anthony Hopkins. Best Director, Jonathan Demme. And Best Picture, Kenneth Ut, Edward Saxon, and Ron Bosman being the credited producers. So it completely blew the whole notion of if a film's released too early in the year, it's forgotten by awards time. That is typically the case.
Yes.
Think how much the voters had to love this movie to remember it that many months later. And
after
vote on it for all these other competitions had been released. And also, by winning 5 categories of writing, directing, picture, and the 2 lead acting categories, it became only the 3rd film in history to win those 5 categories. The others being It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So one of only 3 to achieve that feat. A lot of interesting information into the background of this film and the production. When Ted Tally was actually adapting the novel, writing the screenplay, he envisioned Jodie Foster as playing Clarice Starling. What he did not know, what Jodie Foster didn't know he was thinking of her.
Okay.
She read the novel, loved it, wanted to play Clarice when she heard they were adapting it to a film. So while he's still writing the screenplay, she tried to purchase the rights to the novel to produce it herself and play Clarice. Then she found out that another A-lister had beaten her to it. Gene Hackman had purchased the rights to the novel.
I did not know that.
He was going to make his directorial debut and play either Dr. Hannibal Lecter or the FBI behavioral analysis leader, Jack Crawford.
Okay.
So he purchased the rights, was going to be his directorial debut. Then he suddenly decides, well, now I've read all of the novel. It's just too disturbing. It's not for me. I'm backing out of everything. Here's what I've always wondered. Because I can understand somebody saying, it's too disturbing. It's not for me. But what did he think he was signing up for? And I'm not trying to insult Gene Hackman, but I've always wanted to know. You signed on. You bought the rights to the novel.
You knew what
You were
it
gonna
was.
it's gonna be your directorial debut. You were gonna maybe play this cannibalistic serial killer. Then you decide, once I've read too much, it's just not for me. What did you think it was to be that invested? Again, not insulting the guy. I just don't know, and I've never heard him talk about it, but I'd like to know the answers to that. Because I don't know how you get that invested without already knowing if it's too disturbing or not. But anyway, once he backed out, they hired a director by the name of Jonathan Demme, who had done, I think, maybe 8 to 10 feature films. Wasn't a big name, but got an amazing opportunity here. Ted Tally then suggested Jodie Foster to Jonathan Demme, but Demme's first choice was an actress he had worked with a couple of years prior on a movie called Married to the Mob, Michelle Pfeiffer. So he approached her for Clarice. She turned it down. I've heard 2 stories. There may be some truth to both of them. I've heard that it was too disturbing for her. I've also heard she wanted $2 million and Orion Pictures was not willing to pay her that. Might have been a little bit of both. Don't really know.
I wonder which one is true.
I was going to say, she may have said it was too disturbing after they didn't want to pay her the money.
That was the disturbing part.
Yeah, that was the disturbing. I loved this content, but you're not going to pay me. Come on now. But anyway, as they went on in casting for Clarice, reportedly more than 300 actresses submitted for this role. That doesn't mean that's how many that read, but more than 300 people put their name in the hat or submitted a headshot or something. Again, Michelle Pfeiffer turned it down. Meg Ryan turned it down, also allegedly because it was too gruesome. Nicole Kidman actually came in and read for it. And Brooke Smith, who went on to play Catherine Martin in the film, the young lady that is abducted by Buffalo Bill and held hostage for a good portion of the movie, she also read for Clarice and ended up playing Catherine Martin. After going through all of that, Jonathan Demme finally decided, okay, I'll meet with Jodie Foster. He meets with her one time and said, this is the girl, because he loved her determination and tenacity for how bad she wanted to play that role. He was like, I see attributes of this young FBI trainee in this actress because she wants to play it so bad. And I'll say from a story standpoint, I love that Clarice Starling is a trainee in the FBI program. She's not even an FBI agent.
Right.
Her graduation is at almost the end of the film. So this movie could have been real interesting if you had Jason Gideon, Derek Morgan, Aaron Hotchner, and Spencer Reed for the main characters from the TV series Criminal Minds, the behavioral analysis unit. If you had those guys talking to Hannibal Lecter, trying to hunt down Buffalo Bill, that would have been interesting enough. The fact that they had it be a trainee to gain Hannibal Lecter's trust, to build this connection with him, to glean this information, to blow that case open. I loved that from a storytelling standpoint.
That gives it a different perspective, because you would think the natural choice would be the hardened veteran that's been down this path many times before. But I'm not sure that Hannibal Lecter would have been able to manipulate or think he was manipulating as much the hardened guy, especially being a male. So the choice of female and the choice of the trainee, I'd never thought of that.
Yeah.
But that does give a different flavor to the movie because, imagine this being your first quote unquote case.
Right.
I mean,
right.
come on.
You're not even graduated,
Right.
and she knows who he is because when Jack Crawford, who ended up being played by Scott Glenn, when he tells her, "I want you to talk to one of our more difficult prisoners," who is it? The psychiatrist, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. She says, "Hannibal the Cannibal." She knows dang well what she's walking into, and I have a little bit different perspective. I don't know that Hannibal wouldn't have been able to manipulate the hardened, experienced guys as much. But I think he might not have wasted his time. I think Jack Crawford knew Hannibal's smarter than all of us. He knows we've got an agenda. He's not going to give us anything because he's not going to waste time.
Fair enough.
I send this young lady in that might intrigue him because when Hopkins looked at her ID, he said, "This expires next week. Jack Crawford sent a trainee to speak with me." It's like you got he was kind of intrigued already, like. Really, he must
Why was
think an
this
awful
choice
lot of
made?
you
Yeah.
to send you to talk to me. So I think that's where it worked really well. She gained a trust out of Hannibal that those other guys wouldn't have been tactful enough to probably pull off. So then once Jodie Foster was cast, of course, you got to cast the role of Hannibal Lecter. And there were a list of very impressive names. I don't know if Jonathan Demme met with each one of these guys. Some of them he did, some of them were just considered. But John Hurt, Christopher Lloyd, Dustin Hoffman, Patrick Stewart, Louis Gossett Jr., Robert Duvall, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, and Sean Connery, and John Lithgow, and Jeremy Irons were all considered for the role of Hannibal Lecter. That's a pretty darn impressive list of guys there. And I will say, I think any one of them would have been pretty interesting. The only one I have a little difficulty seeing is Dustin Hoffman. He's a brilliant actor. His performance in Rain Man is one of the best things I've ever seen. I have a hard time seeing him as Hannibal Lecter.
It's funny you mentioned those names, and I had never heard that before. But I've often thought John Lithgow could have played that role. So it's funny that
Yeah,
he
he
was actually
in
considered.
consideration.
Yeah.
I think he would have been great,
Yeah.
to be honest. And I'm curious to see what Dustin Hoffman would have done. Just of this list, and not to pick on him again, he's a brilliant actor.
I can see your point, though.
He's the one that kind of stood out to me of going, really? Okay. But anyway, scheduling conflicts or whatever, none of those guys worked out. Jonathan Demme then had seen Hannibal Lecter. He'd seen Anthony Hopkins in the film The Elephant Man. And so he sent the script to Hopkins' agent. Anthony Hopkins, prior to this, he had done several films, but he wasn't having the career he wanted. It wasn't fulfilling him the way he wanted to. I don't necessarily think it was about a level of fame. I think it was just about he wasn't being fulfilled. He wasn't getting the types of roles he wanted, and he was very dissatisfied with the film career. He had made the decision, I'm just going to move back to London and do as much theater as I can. He basically had said, I'm done trying to do the movie thing. His agent sends him the script, and he said when he first started, he saw the title, The Silence of the Lambs, he thought it was like a children's bedtime story.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I read about 10 pages and quickly realized it was not. But, yeah, he read it, loved it, and when he talked to Jonathan Demme told him, I thought of you because of your performance in The Elephant Man. Anthony Hopkins said, my character in The Elephant Man was a very kind and very good man. How in the world did you... I don't see the connection. Jonathan Demme said, Hannibal Lecter is also a good man. He's just trapped in the mind of a monster. And I thought that was a very interesting take. And he told Hopkins, I want you to give that layer of humanity that I saw in The Elephant Man to this psychotic serial killer. And so...
He made the right call.
A brilliant decision. And as much as I think I would like to have seen John Lithgow and some of these other guys, I'm thankful Hopkins got the opportunity because he was so stinking good. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want to see anyone else really do it. And like I said, he basically was about to give up on it. Think about how this turned things around for him. He wins his first Academy Award. launched his career, giving him A-list status after nearly walking away from the industry at age 51. He was 51 years old when they started shooting this film, turned 52 during the shooting. Almost gave up on his movie career, and I don't want to get too far off topic. That I could do a whole other episode about the power of perseverance and not giving up on stuff and not giving up because you don't know what's about to happen. This is a perfect example of that. Hopkins was that close to just saying, never mind. And what if he had?
A lot of you good actors can probably identify with that.
Oh, I'm sure,
It's
yeah.
not the easiest thing to do, obviously, as you know.
As I very well know. Yes. Hopkins, opportunity of a lifetime came his way at a time where he was not expecting it. And another really interesting, and this speaks to his performance. I just recently read this while I was preparing my notes. During the shooting, during the production, Anthony Hopkins was dating Martha Stewart.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
I had never heard that. It was right around the time she had published some cookbooks. It was right around the time where she had first launched her Martha Stewart Living magazine, which then spawned the TV show. So she was kind of on the brink of becoming a household name herself. Her and Hopkins were dating during the production of this film. When she saw the movie's release, she abruptly ended the relationship, stating, "I can no longer separate Anthony Hopkins from Hannibal Lecter."
He did too good of a job.
So congratulations on your performance being that good.
But you
My
lost your
condolences for the fact that you now have no relationship. But here's an Academy Award. So there's all these different little levels there. But yeah,
Something tells me you would have taken the Academy Award over the woman. I'm just guessing.
Again, you've known me for a while. I mean, I guess it depends on who the woman was. But yeah, and Jodie Foster also has gone on record as saying, because she had not met Anthony Hopkins prior to doing this film, she said he disturbed her so much she could not speak to him off camera.
I had heard that. Yes.
She said, I never spoke to that man other than in character because he disturbed me too much. I just couldn't.
Testament to how good of a job he did again.
How brilliant he was in this film. And so many things I love about this movie. The storytelling, first of all, the Thomas Harris novel had to be great. I haven't read it, but for them to base this off of it. I love some of the things Jonathan Demme did, particularly if you go back and watch it, the way he used reflections, like the first scene where Hannibal and Clarice meet and he's in his cell and they're behind glass. There's several moments where he's talking to her and we see Jodie Foster on camera, but if you look close, you see Hopkins' reflection in the glass, on his side of the glass. There's other times when you see him, you see a reflection of her off of something. So I love the way Demme did that to kind of get both of them in frame without them being lined up beside one another. And then there's another moment later where he did something really that I loved. It was a scene where after Hannibal had been transferred to another location, he's behind bars and Clarice is talking to him. And he was getting really into her psyche. It was a big part of this story. And she's telling him a story about a dream she had had when she was younger, where she woke up and heard this horrible screaming, and it was a lamb. And she grabbed the lamb and ran away to try to rescue it. And that's where the title comes from, The Silence of the Lambs. As she's telling him this story and having this very vulnerable moment, Demme cuts back and forth between close-ups of Hopkins and Jodie Foster. And as the story deepens, he's slowly pushing in on them. And the audience probably doesn't even notice it, but you're being drawn in closer to these characters' faces as you're being drawn in by the story. And I absolutely loved that. I was like, man, I wonder how many people realize that that's what was even happening to him. Because it'd be easy to overlook because he did it real slow and real subtle. But by the end of that conversation, you're in really tight on both of them. And I love that he deepened the focus on both of them as the conversation deepened. And both Foster and Hopkins give brilliant performances. They were both awarded with Academy Awards. I think their performances really is the biggest part of this movie that I love and what really drives the movie the most. And I think Jodie Foster, I talked about the character of Clarice, in a lesser actress's hands, this could have been a good performance and a good character. With Jodie Foster, it was a great character because she combined a level of fearlessness and a combination of vulnerability with that fearlessness and wove it all together because you saw this young trainee that was way in over her head, way out of her element, but also somebody that just was not going to quit. And the relationship that she built with Hannibal Lecter was actually really interesting. And I say relationship, there was nothing romantic that was ever revealed, but there was this level of trust that was built between the two of them, and he started telling her things and planting information in her because he started trusting her. And there's a moment where he had escaped, and one of the other FBI agents tells Clarice that he escaped. Clarice immediately says, "He won't come after me. I don't know how to explain it to you, but he just won't. He would consider it rude." And that's all she says, but you're like, she knows this psychotic killer will not come for me. I can't explain why he would consider it rude. We've got that type of a bond. And she had no fear about it. And Hopkins, for his performance, in my opinion, he delivers a masterclass at playing a powerful character without ever going overboard. He only raises his voice one time in that entire movie, yet everyone that encounters him is absolutely terrified of him. Only time he raises his voice is in that first meeting with he and Clarice. She's starting to leave down the corridor. These other prisoners all start yelling, so he has to yell louder to get her attention, to tell her something. He tells her, "Go now," and he does it kind of aggressively. It's the only time he raises her voice, and it's not even out of anger. The rest of the film, he's just calm and in control, and always he's like playing chess with everybody that's in the room. He's several moves ahead of them, and Hopkins himself said he compared Hannibal Lecter to the machine HAL 9000 from the 2001 A Space Odyssey film. Because Hannibal said, like HAL 9, or Hannibal said, see, I'm getting them mixed up. I understand Martha Stewart. Anthony Hopkins said, like HAL 9000, Hannibal Lecter is a brilliant killing machine who always stays a step ahead of everyone else that he's in the room with because he knows everything that's going on and he's smarter than everybody around him. And that's why he didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to get out of control. He was smarter than everybody, and just the fact that you knew what he's capable of was enough to terrify everyone that encountered him. And Hopkins did another brilliant thing. And I think this was his choice. I don't think, from what I've heard, he did this on his own. I don't think he was directed to do this. And I don't know how many people notice it, but I'm going to talk about it. He blinks very few times in this film. He only blinks at like certain moments. And I'm going to tell you why it's so powerful. He just locks eyes with everybody he speaks to. And you feel the power from his stare, and it forces them and the audience to be drawn in more to him. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to show it to the audience so they can get a perspective of me. Because I've shown this example to people over the years. Because this is one of the examples. I've started doing this in a lot of my characters. If I'm playing a character in an authoritative position or someone who's like delivering really powerful information. Hopkins is one of the reasons I barely will blink playing certain characters. And I've actually done this in life as well. So I'm going to give you an example. If I were to say to you, "What are you talking about?" I could look at you and say, "What are you talking about?" Or I could look at you and say, "What are you talking about?" Now I'm going to do it to the camera so the audience will see what Talon just saw. I could look at you and say, "What are you talking about?" Or I could say, "What are you talking about?" Now notice I did not change one single word. I did not raise my voice. I did not sharpen my voice. I didn't stand up or do anything different. The only thing I did different was not blink. But did it feel different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say it did.
Yeah, because there was more focus on you. You felt like I was more intent with you and more connected, and that's what Hopkins did so brilliantly in this. He drew people in, I think, with that stare. And then my final point, and this goes back to the relationship that he had with Clarice. He calls her as he's about to leave at the very end of the film, and gets her on the phone, and he says, I have no plans to call on you, Clarice. The world's more interesting with you in it. You take care now to extend to me the same courtesy. She replies, you know I can't make that promise. And that's their last interaction for that film. But that's the respect of saying, I'm out now. Don't worry, I'm not coming after you. The world's more interesting with you in it. So anyway, very realistic movie. If you somehow haven't seen it yet, well worth watching. Brilliantly told story, brilliantly acted. Very successful. Obviously one of only 3 films to win Academy Awards for picture, director, writing, and the 2 lead acting roles. So those are our favorite horror films. If you haven't seen them, check them out. Thank you all so much again for joining us today. If you haven't done so already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It'll give us more opportunities to continue bringing you this content, and you'll be alerted when new videos are released. For Talmadge Roger Varnado III.
Thank you, sir.
Indudablemente. I am Jared Johnson, the Jared J. Y'all have a great week, and I hope I see you again real soon.